Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for our lab webinar on culturally responsive mental health supports in school settings. Your presenters today are Madeline Walker and Mike Bukinski. Before I present or introduce the both of them, just want to go over a few key reminders. The talk will run up until 2:45, 2:50. We will have a 5 to 10 minute question and answer session at the end of the hour. So if you have any questions or comments you would like to submit for the Q&A, please feel free to use the chat box, or you can wait until the end to ask your question. Please mute your sound throughout the whole presentation. And if you're comfortable, you can turn on your video. As I mentioned, your presenters today are Madeline Walker and Mike Bukinski. Maddie is a Utah native. She is currently a first-year school psychology student. Maddie graduated with her bachelor's degree in psychology from Brigham Young University last spring, and she currently works as a behavioral support specialist in the Granite School District Climbs program. Mike Bukinski is a first-year school psychology student. Mike graduated from UTTEC University with a bachelor's in psychology, and he currently works at the Slick C. Bryant Middle School in the Atlas program. Welcome, Maddie and Mike. We are very excited to have you here today. I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to you both.
Awesome. Thank you, Annie. Well, great. Well, yeah, welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us. To any of you that will be watching this later, we just hope that this presentation is educational and informative and can help you in your professional development. So today we're going to be discussing culturally responsive mental health support in school settings. And specifically, we're going to be focusing on the unique needs of immigrants and refugees, or these newcomer students in Utah schools. So our presentation will cover the following topics. We'll begin by providing you with some statistics on the immigrant and refugee populations in Utah to help set the context for our discussion. And next, we'll examine the differences in mental health outcomes between children in the United States and immigrant children, highlighting the need for culturally responsive support. And then we'll explore some of the unique problems that immigrant populations face, which can impact their mental health and overall well-being. And then we will discuss how mental health issues can affect various aspects of daily life, including academic achievement, social functioning, self-esteem, and also suicide risk. Then we'll also examine some of the complexities of understanding and addressing mental health among immigrant and refugee youth. And we'll consider factors like diverse populations, research methodologies, cultural stigma, and more. We'll provide evidence-based, culturally sensitive mental health treatment recommendations that you can apply in your work as school-based professionals. And then finally, we'll discuss some practical strategies and considerations for supporting the mental health needs of immigrant and refugee students within the Utah school system. So yeah, researching this topic has been a great way for me personally to better understand the unique needs of some of the students that I currently serve in the Salt Lake City School District. Just where I work, or just at the school where I work primarily, about 65% of the student population come from various cultural and ethnic backgrounds. And so, I see firsthand that not all mental health approaches work the same, and there is a need for us to tailor our services to fit these unique needs that these students have.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I also learned so much researching and learning about what our state provides for our newcomer population. And I'm really excited to share these resources with you guys and get some feedback and what you guys have seen also. But like Mike will touch on briefly, this topic is very important to each of us as mental health and school professionals to know more about, and has specific personal importance to me as well. I've had a front row seat to watch just a small part of the immigration process and experience with my husband Diego, who just moved here from Chile 5 years ago, he moved here alone as an adult, but there are thousands of children and families across the nation that are asked to navigate this complicated process in addition to their everyday tasks, responsibilities in school, and just trying to be a kid. There's so many complexities that associate with the experience that we don't even have to think about until a loved one's faced with the task or ourselves. And so we wanted to touch a bit on how we can make that experience easier for them and help them out that way.
Yeah, so as school-based mental health professionals working in Utah, understanding the importance of culturally responsive mental health support is really essential for several reasons. First, our state is home to thousands of immigrant and refugee families, with these students representing a significant and diverse population in our schools. The diverse backgrounds, languages, and cultures of these students really do enrich our communities, but also present unique challenges that we as mental health professionals have to address. For example, a student from a war-torn country may have experienced traumatic events that require specific intervention strategies. And second, immigrant and refugee students often face a range of challenges that can impact not only their mental health, but also their overall well-being. These challenges may include trauma, acculturation stress, language barriers, discrimination, and social isolation. And as school-based mental health professionals, we have a responsibility to understand these challenges and address their specific needs to provide the best possible support. This might involve using, some bilingual resources or collaborating with different cultural organizations. And third, culturally appropriate mental health treatments and interventions are important in providing equitable access to mental health services for all students. This means that we need to take into account the diverse cultural backgrounds, values, and beliefs of our students when designing and implementing mental health services. And by doing so, we can create an inclusive and supportive environment that promotes mental health and well-being for everyone. For instance, incorporating different cultural elements into therapy sessions or utilizing culturally relevant materials can be helpful with this. And lastly, the increasing diversity of our schools really underscores the importance of preparing ourselves to serve all of these students effectively. As school-based mental health professionals, we have a really unique opportunity to make a positive impact on the lives of our students and their families. And by discussing and exploring this topic today, we just hope to equip you with some knowledge, some skills, and some tools necessary to provide culturally responsive mental health support, and hopefully really make a difference in the lives of these students that we work with now and potentially in our future careers. So together, we can ensure that every student has the support that they need to thrive, regardless of their background or any challenges that they may face.
Yeah, so this is just a little summary and statistics on what the Utah newcomer population looks like in Utah. So these first stats is from the American Immigration Council in 2019, that just between 2000 and 2019, the immigration population in Utah grew by 63.7%. There were 258,000 immigrants in Utah at this time, and of our K through 12 population, there was 16.5% of those students were immigrant or newcomer students. That's 128,100 students in the state. So that's a significant population that we're talking about here in Utah specifically, and thinking about how much our state has grown just in the past 4 years. As far as population goes, this is probably much higher now. Another stat just to think about is our refugee population in Utah. We settle about 1,000 as of 2015, so this is probably updated significantly in the last, that's almost 10 years. We would resettle 1,000 plus refugees every year to Utah, and at that time was 25,000 refugees. So this chart is not newcomer population, but rather English learners per district. and every district on here has at least 1,000 English learners. And so as you can see, out of the top 5, we served 4 of those districts, excluding Alpine School District. So we, in the lab at least. And so our lab is in contact with a lot of these populations, whether they're in our classes, they're in our schools. And so being able to create an inclusive environment and helping these students is so important. But just to give you some stats of the top 3, well, 3 districts were in Salt Lake County from these, and that's Jordan, Granite, and Salt Lake. And from their website, Jordan School District advertised that there are, not advertised, but claimed that there are 62 refugees, 740 newcomers as of November 2022, so a little more updated data. And then Granite is home to 103 different languages between student families. And then Salt Lake City School District has 80 spoken languages in families. So we have quite a bit of diversity in Salt Lake City School District, or Salt Lake Valley alone, but within our school districts in the UTTEC lab, we've got a lot of diversity that way and responsibility as well.
Yeah, so here we just wanted to kind of show and compare some of the mental health outcomes of children and adolescents in the United States, and compare those with the immigrant child and adolescent population. So first, we can kind of want to consider the overall mental health of children and adolescents in the US. And according to the CDC in 2022, the prevalence of mental health disorders among US children and adolescents is as follows. So we have ADHD at about a 9.8%, anxiety with 9.4%, and depression at 4.4%. So now when we look at the mental health of immigrant children in the US, we see that ADHD is 8.6%, but anxiety is a 15.8%, and depression is a 13.8%. So you can see there are some differences in the prevalence of these disorders between the two populations, with the immigrant youth showing higher rates of depression and anxiety. And then additionally, there was a study by the Utah Department of Health and Services in 2015 that found that over 27% of refugees screened in the initial domestic screening process had symptoms of mental health concerns. And of that 27%, 39% of those had scores significant enough to need to be referred out for treatment. And so even though the overall prevalence of mental health disorders might seem comparable between US and immigrant children, it's really important for us to remember that immigrant youth face unique challenges. Some of those challenges, like we've talked about a little bit, is acculturation, exposure to trauma and discrimination. And these really require us to approach mental health interventions with a culturally sensitive lens, so that we can ensure that we effectively support their well-being.
Yeah, so kind of the answers we want to, the question we want to answer on this slide here is, why is it that there are more mental health concerns in the population? Why is it that there's so many mental health symptoms and compared to the general population? So as complicated and unique as each individual experience might be, there are 3 factors we saw trend across the research. And to maybe understand these difficulties a little better, we are going to watch a 3-minute video narrated by a Philippine immigrant telling her family story. So let me just pull that up real quick. Here we go.
I wish all this food would just cook itself. What?
In June of 2001, I was born to 2 wonderful parents in the country of the Philippines. Both of my parents and their family have grown up there and lived there for most of their lives. My sister Icy was born there as well. After my parents got married, they've been wanting to immigrate to the United States for a long time. My dad's side of the family were starting to move there in hopes of a better life. The United States was known for the land of opportunity and freedom, and my parents would have more opportunities for themselves and their future kids. They knew that if they moved there, we could live more comfortably. It took years for my parents to get the green light on being able to immigrate to the United States. There were a lot of requirements and tests they had to go through to make sure they weren't dangerous or sick and educated enough to live there. We were lucky enough, and we finally moved to California in 2004. We lived with my uncle and his family who were already staying here while we looked for a new house to move into permanently. Everything was okay for the first years we were there, and then I had to start school. Kindergarten was hard. I remember it very vividly. I couldn't speak English and it was hard to make friends. They really didn't know how to talk to me. I'd always cry because no one wanted to be my friend and I never understood what the teacher was saying. I started getting used to it and I learned English naturally. I started making friends and all was well. In 2007, my sister Louine was born, and that's when our family became complete. My parents raised me as if we still lived in the Philippines. They had strict rules and traditional Filipino morals. They're very conservative and very religious. Most of my lectures as a child were usually based on religion and what God would have wanted me to do. Flash forward to 6th grade, I moved to another school, so I had to say goodbye to my friends that I've known for a long time and adapt to a new environment with new people. And I started noticing things that made me different from everyone else. I started bringing a packed lunch to school, and it usually consisted of rice and eggs, rice and sausage, or anything my dad can pack rice with. Everyone first thought it was weird that I always had rice and random Filipino food. It had a distinct smell. I'd always feel embarrassed because I didn't have lunch bowls or a PB&J like all my other classmates. Other people would make fun of me because I would pronounce things differently, like comfortable, like comfortable. That's how my parents taught me how to say it. Every time I correct them, they tell me that their English isn't their first language and that I should be patient. I'd also feel embarrassed if I went somewhere with my dad because he had a very thick Filipino accent and people wouldn't understand him and I'd have to translate. Even though there were times where we didn't fit in, I still loved them so much. And I'll forever appreciate the things they did and went through for us.
Okay, great. I just think that gives a really good idea of what personal experience might be like. And as we're going to discuss throughout, every situation is so personal, regardless on if they're coming from the same country or whatever it is. But knowing firsthand what some of the complications they go through and the things they're embarrassed about is kind of helpful to put in perspective for us who might not have experienced that. So, like I said, 3 of the main factors that we saw across the literature and research that were unique problems for immigrant populations that are kind of mentioned in this video as well is acculturation, first and foremost. And from this study, it was talking about how the unique factors immigrants face as far as that play a part in suicide risk. And so we know that like social isolation and maybe high stress are both different suicide factors that the general population might experience, but immigrants have these additional factors that could be high risk for them. And number 1 is acculturation. So that would be accommodating the whole host culture. So this could be things as big as knowing which side of the road to drive on, and I guess those are comparatively small things. So just having to be accustomed to that, and also going to the grocery store and not knowing which products are good to buy or which ones aren't good, and having to find a whole new system that way, or even where to go for certain things, like having to go to the DMV to get your driver's license, all of these things, accommodating to the new system that they're living in. But the biggest factors are language barriers oftentimes, although not all immigrants have language barriers because maybe they spoke English in their home country. But that can be a huge one as far as being able to communicate with others and making friends for kids. but their parents might have a hard time finding jobs because they need to be competent in speaking English. They can have difficulty gaining employment also because of documentation and not having a work visa and that whole situation. And then once again, feeling socially isolated because of having to adapt and being different from others. And then financial and poor living conditions can happen because of the difficulty gaining employment. And once again, these aren't factors that everyone faces, but it is a general, I would say, and what we've seen is the majority of those moving do have these problems that they run into and these barriers. Another thing to consider, our second factor, is the trauma that can be part of their past and moving on from that. A lot of refugees especially have potentially experienced these traumatic events before their arrival in the US, like armed conflict, violence, persecution, natural disasters, human rights violations. Going through a war would be especially traumatizing. And even things as simple as leaving your home country, not simple, but things like leaving your family or leaving part of your family, your extended family, to come to a new country. So this can lead to symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression. And so those are things that we as mental health professionals are here to help with. And then discrimination, which was talked about briefly in the video, but things that like bringing rice to lunch instead of Lunchables or PB&Js, that's another worry or stress that they have throughout the day on, oh no, are people going to make fun of me because my food stinks, on top of trying to learn the new language and adapt that way. And that can be very socially isolating, being discriminated against. And social support is a very strong factor of mental health well-being, as we know. And so that is another risk factor that plays into all of this.
Yeah, so now we kind of wanted to examine how, take a closer look at how mental health could impact different areas of daily life for these students. And so concerning academic achievement, this can be, significantly affected by mental health concerns. Issues such as cognitive functioning, attention, and motivation can be negatively impacted, leading to poorer academic performance. For example, an immigrant student dealing with anxiety might have a harder time focusing during school. And, for these students, these issues can be compounded by things like language barriers, cultural differences in education systems, and the stress of adapting to a new learning environment. When it comes to social functioning, this is another area that can be impacted by mental health concerns. Students may struggle to form and maintain positive relationships, affecting their overall social well-being. Imagine a refugee student who feels isolated due to these language barriers and cultural differences, and how difficult that would make it to connect with their peers. So for these students, this challenge can also be intensified by these language barriers, the cultural differences, and the experience of discrimination or social isolation in this new environment. And then self-esteem can also be heavily influenced by mental health issues. So feelings of low self-esteem can further exacerbate mental health problems. These students may experience a lower sense of self-worth due to the stress of acculturation, experiences of discrimination, and the challenges of navigating a new cultural landscape. So, for example, a student from Mexico who is adjusting to the US education system might feel embarrassed or overwhelmed when they struggle to understand English and when they notice that their classmates appear to be performing better. Suicide risk is also a really important consideration. These students experiencing mental health difficulties may be at an increased risk of suicidal ideation and behaviors. So factors such as social isolation, lack of social support, and the stress of adjusting to a new culture can contribute to this heightened risk. For instance, a teenager from or a teenage refugee from Syria who has been resettled in Utah might feel overwhelmed by the loss of their support network and the challenges of integrating into a new society. And so, these combinations of these factors, along with lingering effects of trauma, could potentially lead to them experiencing, depression and considering self-harm or suicide as a way to cope with their emotions. So here, we wanted to examine and discuss some of the discrepancy considerations that make addressing mental health among these students such a complex issue. So first, it's important for us to recognize that immigrant students come from a wide range of countries, cultures, and backgrounds. So for example, a student from Guatemala may have, different cultural norms and expectations than a student from Vietnam. So, factors like language, cultural norms, religious beliefs, trauma experiences can all impact how mental health issues are perceived and expressed. And this diversity requires a personalized, culturally sensitive approach to mental health assessment and treatment. So next, there are differences in research methodologies, and this can make it difficult to compare findings across studies, which will also impact our understanding of effective interventions. So a study conducted in the US might not be directly comparable to one done in Canada due to different cultural biases, and this could further limit the generalizability of these findings and create challenges in identifying effective mental health interventions. And yeah, different cultures may have unique ways of addressing mental health concerns, and different cultural beliefs and values can shape attitudes toward mental health. And this can also contribute to stigma. So for instance, in some cultures, mental health issues might be attributed to spiritual or supernatural causes, and this may lead people to seek help from traditional or religious healers rather than mental health professionals. And this can result in incorrect or untreated diagnoses and impact the identification of mental health needs. And then access to mental health services is another important consideration. So language barriers, employment and insurance, and culturally competent providers are all factors that can influence care or access to care. And, with 47% of immigrant children living in poverty compared to 17% of non-immigrant children, and about 675,000 children in the US being undocumented, the responsibility really kind of lies on us as school-based mental health professionals to address these disparities and ensure equitable access to mental health supports and services. And then kind of diving more into acculturation and adaptation, this can also play a significant role in mental health. And take for example, a student from Somalia who has recently arrived in the United States. This student may face the challenge of adapting to a new educational approach, such as collaborative learning or the emphasis on student participation, which might differ from their previous experience. Additionally, they might struggle with understanding and conforming to new social norms, such as navigating peer relationships, school events, and extracurricular activities. And navigating challenges like learning a new language, adjusting to a new school setting, and forming new school relationships can be major sources of stress, and these can all potentially increase mental health difficulties or challenges. Pre and post immigration experiences, such as forced displacement and resettlement issues can further impact mental health. So again, a Syrian refugee, for example, might have faced separation from family, loss of social support, and exposure to, unsafe or unstable living conditions during the transition, which can further increase mental health concerns. And then lastly, legal status and policy changes can significantly impact the lives and well-being of immigrant students. So changes in immigration policies and laws can create uncertainty and anxiety for students and their families. And legal status can also influence access to, educational and mental health services. So fear of deportation or family separation can also increase these mental health concerns and add to, increased stress, anxiety, and depression. So really understanding and addressing these complex factors is really essential for developing effective, culturally sensitive mental health treatments and interventions for these students.
Okay, so some of you may have already seen this little animation or graphic. So it's a little bit blurry, so I apologize about that. But I thought this was a good representation of inequality and justice in general. But I thought for our presentation specifically, it could kind of represent the different kinds of treatments that we can provide and that schools provide currently for their newcomer students. So the first slide here might represent kind of the inequality of what it looks like for students who speak other languages and don't have accommodations at all. So they're not getting much from their education experience. They might not have a translator, or they're just kind of there to figure out as they go. And as you can see, they might not be getting as much as our native English speakers or those who are born in the United States. The bottom left with equality question mark, it says there's evenly distributed tools and assistance, but it's still not enough to be able to help out our newcomer friends who need a little bit more accommodation. So the bottom left would be like minimal support that still makes education experience less profitable. So maybe they have an interpreter, but like when it's the most necessary. So like parent-teacher conferences, and that's about it. Our students still aren't going to be receiving as much as they should be. And then top right is the equity square, and it says down there, custom tools that identify and address inequality. So this is where we start doing the personalized, like there are interpreters, or there's a specific times during the day that those students might be able to go out and get one-on-one tutoring or training or any of that, using accommodations and culturally specific treatment for the individual child. So they are starting to get what they need from education. And then the bottom right is kind of the ideal, what we would like to do. And in my mind, how I wanted to compare it would be having culturally competent staff, culturally inclusive environments, and then sufficient resources for the child and families, all on like a broad scope of things. And that's where we want to be able to get, just so that they are able to get the same amount as our students who aren't newcomers. So I think that was a good little visual and helped simplify things a little bit to a way that seems seems more understandable. And so now I'm going to be going over some different treatment recommendations and resources that I have been able to find in Utah specifically, but then different steps we can take to kind of adapt our treatments, our evidence-based treatments, in order to help out these students and help them feel comfortable. So these are some culturally responsive treatment recommendations. Number one is ongoing training and education for professionals to enhance cultural competence. This is so important because there are so many different cultures and so many different situations among our human experience and different individuals. And so being able to have these DEI trainings, diversity, equity, and inclusion training for staff and care providers, having resources available for educators, updated as new populations and languages are introduced, updating translators and interpreters. I know that can get sticky now, and we've had a couple of school psychologists talk to us in our program about trying to find different interpreters that speak Marshallese or things like that, where we just haven't encountered that yet, and so we have to adapt. But having the resources to be able to do that. And then there's online and community resources, and I found some great resources, specifically from Jordan school districts page, and I'm going to show that here. Let me. Okay. So, Jordan School District, they have a specific page for language and culture services that you can access from their Jordan School District page. And it's just right there, super accessible. They have different resources here for families, students, resources for teachers, special ed, all of this, and then a specific page for refugees and immigrants. And I thought this was amazing. You can look at who, like, get to know the population, updated legislation, school resources, family resources, how to help, and all of these things. And I was actually able to find 2 more websites from this website that I loved. This one is a toolkit for teachers and school personnel, and it's a specific down here, as you can see. You've got the documents in this toolkit include, and there's all of these topics on random things like how to enroll a refugee child into US schools and how that might be difficult because they might not have the documentation that students usually need to have to enroll. Just a personal experience, I recently had some friends move from another country that I knew previously, and they got here and had to enroll their students. And we had to go through a whole process. They weren't refugees, but they were immigrants, and so they're from Chile, and they they had to do this whole thing where, because their birth certificate wasn't from the United States, they had to go to the notary, get that signed, even though they had all the documents ready. And so being able to know what you're going to run into to be able to help your students if you do run into this, these difficulties and what they might have and different things to consider, so important. So having this toolkit is very helpful. Another one that we found here, and I'm going to include all of these at the end of the presentation in the chat. But so this one is Utah Refugee Connection that also I found from our Jordan website. And it talks about different ways you can donate, Amazon wish list for the refugee or organizations that are in Utah, learn about them, volunteer, attend an event. There's so many different opportunities to serve this population outside of schools. And then this one is the Utah Education Network. There really is so much out there. I get excited about it. So this, you can scroll down here. You got educator resources, so new student support, classroom resources, cultural awareness, articles, other resources, so many different things. And then you can go over here to parent resources, student resources, and it never ends. And so that's something to keep in mind, that the resources are out there. And so making sure that school districts make educators aware that there is training, there's tools, and working with what we have, because it can be difficult, as we talked about discrepancies and different things, make it more complicated. But having those are really important. So moving on from that point, it is so important to have accessible interpreter and translation services. It's not just preferred, but it's vital to have a professionally trained interpreter and not just using a family member, even though sometimes that's kind of what is done because of resources, doing everything we can to make sure we have someone there, because otherwise it can be unsafe. It can be clinically unsafe because maybe they're not aware of the treatment they'll be receiving. The parents don't understand what's going on with their child, and things might be misinterpreted, or misinformation could spread. And so this is a very important part to making sure we're helping out our newcomer populations. Community involvement, something that I appreciated also from the Jordan School District webpage, is that there's multicultural councils and parent caregiver committees. What I think this looks like from what I read is like making sure that these populations are represented in PTAs, or having a separate council to be able to contact paid parents with different languages or different cultures. Another thing would be even discussing with the parents if they'd be willing to share different things to the staff or school staff in general to be able to understand how we can better serve them, and asking if they'd be comfortable with that, and obviously not pushing if not. But and then trauma-informed care is something that I thought needed to be included in these culturally responsive recommendations, because a lot of our refugees and even and immigrants as well may have experienced trauma. It's traumatic leaving your family. It's traumatic if they experienced war or anything like that. And so the number one step would be recognizing these symptoms. And so we don't have to assume that all of the immigrants or refugees have this trauma or experiencing symptoms of it, but we can use the DSM-5 as a checklist to see if we're seeing some of these symptoms, as well as the trauma symptom checklist 40 that help us kind of see what's going on and see if we do need to implement trauma treatment, trauma-informed care. So something that I heard from this article here is that stabilization techniques to reduce overall stress in the body is something to teach, like our coping skills that a lot of us are teaching our students, but making sure that we have this real like deep using breath work exercises, mindfulness, relaxation techniques to really tone down the somatic symptoms that they might be experiencing with really high anxiety and hyperarousal, intrusive symptoms, these kind of things. And after we're able to master those with our students, kind of decide if they need further trauma work and therapy. And obviously think about our competence in that. If we are competent, move forward. If not, pass it on to someone else or give resources for outside care for that. So trauma work, and then peer support and mentorship programs can help with helping the student feel accepted and feel like they have a friend, whether it's peer support from someone within their same culture or populations experience similar things. That'd be great. They can help translate and teach them, but throughout class. And then the other option would be just being able to have someone there to look out for them and really putting trust in that student to give them a friend when they need someone or ask questions or any of that. So it'd be super important. But some specific culturally sensitive intervention articles that I found that I wanted to go over here. The first one was a study on the African immigrant populations and what they felt was lacking from mental health services. And so it's kind of just a general what was lacking and everything. And the biggest things they talked about were religion, like intervening or putting religion into consideration with everything. So making sure that it's in accordance with everything they believe, being able to understand their culture because they felt like the education was lacking, and then having the lack of community resources. And so what we can do as part of that and considering how to help our students is having more education on cultural specific practices. Like we talked about earlier, always having that training continually, being able to understand the cultural manifestations and impressions of mental illness, and then making time for religious or cultural practices and integrating them into treatment if that's what they prefer. So asking them if there is anything that they want to do in throughout the day that they feel like is important in their home, if they'd like to do any of that while they're meeting with us or whatever it is, and making time for that and for them. And then, and for example, I know that, I don't know the specifics on this, but in our school where I work at Robert Frost Elementary, I know that there are certain times during the week that a certain group of students, anyone who wants to go into a room and have time for prayer are able to do that. And I know that there's a lot of students who go in there and they have that time for them, and then they go back to classes and everything back. So being able to provide something like that, I think is really awesome. And then our newcomer students are going to need maybe some more resources to be able to understand where to go for help or what they need to do in certain situations. And so really having that link with community resources is important. In the second study, the PARA study, talks about cultural adaptation of evidence-based treatment. And then the first bullet point, it says, the systematic modification of an evidence-based, so cultural adaptation is the systematic modification of an evidence-based treatment or intervention protocol to consider language, culture, and context in such a way that is compatible with the client's cultural patterns, meaning, and values. And in this study, they specifically are helping the Latino population implement the parent management training organ model. So they picked this one because it was specific for this population, where in Latino cultures, generally the family is the central unit and they're very tight knit. And so being able to have that family closeness by having parent training to the child, and then as well as the respect from parent to child type thing. And this treatment specifically was made and adapted among low-income families and those who might have both parents working and oftentimes are in that situation. And so they felt that this was an appropriate treatment for this culture specifically that way. But then they went further to adapt this parent management training so that it first step was translating the treatment, and then from there collaborating with research and community leaders and making sure that this is going to have a positive impact on Latino community. So not just a group of people deciding this is going to be great, but actually talking with them, with the community and with representatives of the community to make sure that it will be effective and will actually help them. Step 3 is they conducted a large qualitative study with Latino immigrant parents to gain understanding of most relevant life experiences. So things that they face every day and things that they feel like they need help with, and integrate that into the program. And then the last step is to do a pilot study and compare and contrast the initial implementation, feasibility, and cultural acceptability. So this can be this is like a complex research study, and so we might not have time to do this for every treatment we want to implement on our students. But I think these 4 steps of translating, collaborating with community leaders, asking the population and trying it out is very important as far as for our treatment. And in this actual study, they compared the original parent management training to an adapted translated version, and then to a culturally enhanced version. And we're able to find that through like questionnaires and everything, that the culturally enhanced version was the favorite of the Latino community, specifically in Detroit. And then it also led to higher client engagement and higher ratings from parents. So I thought that was a great model of how we can, in a more simplified version, maybe adapt our evidence-based treatment. So our slide here on serving these populations in our schools. A lot of the times, collaborating with our treatment team is going to involve a lot more social workers and cultural liaisons, just because we might need more help as far as knowing what resources are there for our students. And then as far as I was able to go over some of these websites earlier, but engaging with families and communities. Here we have from the Jordan website that I showed you guys, there are a lot of parent and student resources, refugee stories, and information, so we can engage that way. And then both of these that I talked about earlier as well. And then holding community sessions with parents, I think, yeah, like we talked about earlier, like getting them involved in PTA and really asking and reaching out and doing our part to make sure that they feel like we're giving their students what they need, and if there is anything else we can help with. And then advocating for policies and practices. This includes change in policy and practices, but also implementing and upholding what's already there. So this specifically, Plyer v. Doe in 1982 goes over how our students have the right, documented or undocumented, documented, regardless of your citizenship status or whatever it is, to go to school. So just because a child's undocumented does not mean they don't have the right to go to school. And it also protects the right that they don't even have to tell the school if they're undocumented or not, or students or parents don't have to give their social securities or anything like that that would discriminate or differentiate them from other students that way. And so letting our students and their families know that that's a right that they have, and helping them and making sure that our staff is upholding that and not asking for that information that's not relevant or appropriate to ask for. And then the last thing I wanted to go over, this is just this is Jordan School District again, culture specific interventions that's going on in our state. So this is the Culture and Diversity Equity Plan. And on their website, it says the Culture, Diversity, and Parent Outreach Team works to provide teachers and students with strategies and conversations on equity, what it means to have an inclusive environment, how to have cultural competence in our schools and classrooms while encouraging family and community engagement. And I encourage you all to look at this later, but I just kind of put the summary of the 4 tiers that this plan implements. And that tier 1 is the inclusive environment. So making sure the teachers, district, and administration are all on board to make sure that we have a culturally inclusive environment, providing workshops and resources on how to do that. Tier 2 is equity and opportunity for Jordan School District employees. So making sure that cultures are represented within the workforce and not just in our students, so that they can form these relationships and educate our students as well. And then tier 3 is cultural competence with students and teachers. So having a culturally inclusive curriculum, creating a structure on multicultural councils so that we're making sure that we're really including and assisting all of these populations. And then family and community opportunity for parents and community. That's what we talked about earlier, is having multicultural councils and parent caregiver committees. So this is another link I will include in the chat, but I just thought this was amazing because it really puts into practice and has a whole breakdown on how to create this environment and how to help these populations. So.
Yeah, thanks, Maddie. That's such great information and just a lot of great resources. I know we're kind of closing out on time here, so just wanted to do like a quick summary of some of the key takeaways that we hope you come away with. So it's really important for us to recognize the significant presence of immigrant and refugee students in Utah schools, as well as some of those unique challenges that they face. It's really important for us as school-based mental health experts to understand the importance of addressing mental health among these students, and that their mental health really directly affects their academic achievement, social functioning, and self-esteem. We need to be aware of the various discrepancy considerations, such as cultural differences, the research methodologies, acculturation, policy changes, and all these factors add a level of complexity to our understanding of treatment and mental health in these diverse populations. So we need to prioritize culturally responsive treatment recommendations, tailoring these interventions to the specific needs of the individual students and their cultural backgrounds. This includes focusing on cultural competency, collaborating with families, and leveraging community resources. So lastly, in serving these populations in Utah schools, our goal really should be to create an inclusive and supportive environment that promotes mental health and well-being for all students. And, we really must continually engage in professional development and stay informed about the best practices that are available and these culturally responsive approaches.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Another thing to consider is just instead of thinking of these responsibilities as another problem to solve, it's so important to celebrate and consider our privilege to be able to learn from these populations and watch them thrive as they receive the treatment that they deserve. Something that I loved from the American Immigration Council, that on their article at the end, it said these students will bring additional global perspective and language capability to Utah's expanding talent pool. And I think that I really appreciated how they acknowledged that at the end of their article. It's not just a task of finding interpreters and finding resources and all of this. It's really that we're all going to thrive when we all work together and help each other out. And it's important also to celebrate our diverse cultures instead of only trying to integrate them into ours. So in closing, our work as school-based mental health professionals is essential to the success of those diverse students we serve. And by understanding and addressing the unique mental health challenges faced by our immigrant and refugee students, we can contribute to their academic and emotional well-being while upholding our ethical responsibilities to provide culturally responsive mental health support. And thanks for sticking with us. I know we went kind of long, but that's the end of our presentation. And here's our references. But thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Maddie and Mike, for a great presentation. We'll open it up for questions and comments, if there's any.
I'm just gonna say that you guys did a great job, and also explaining that even when each population is different, immigrants, refugees, they came from different backgrounds. If you said refugees from Africa, they may speak different languages, different culture, different religions, each of those countries. So I'm glad that you specified that. And yeah, thank you for the presentation. It was very informational.
Awesome. If there are no other questions or comments for now, of course, if you have additional questions, you can always email Maddie and Mike directly if you have questions after this presentation. But otherwise, this concludes today's presentation. One big virtual round of applause for Maddie and Mike for a great webinar today. This presentation is recorded and will be uploaded to the UTTEC Lab YouTube channel and website, which you can access by going to u-tteclab.com. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining.